We PE teachers think we don't need a mic.
That's why we don't need a mic, so we can get rid of the echo. Thank you there, Alan. Little Alan humor in the back to keep us going. All right, well, welcome. And a couple announcements. If you haven't signed up, if you are here new and you haven't put your name there and your email, we like to send out information and outlines and that sort of thing. So please sign up in the back. Do we have some new people? It looks like we have some new people. You've been here before, Larry. You're back. Glad to have you back. Who else? We got Paul and Jan in the back. Raise your hands there, Paul and Jan. Paul taught at Hidden Valley, and I taught with Paul for a while. He's a bridge player, so am I. He's a good one. I'm not. And who else hasn't been here this semester? Yes. Ginger Gustafson. Your wife. And your first name? Gary. Garrett or Gary? Gary, good name. You're getting all these Orange Glen people. They still come and they know you and they're here. Okay. Hi. Well, welcome. Well, we need to thank Rick. Where's Rick? Raise your hand. Rick, for the goodies we have over there. Thank you very much. Boy, people have really been digging into those goodies, Rick. I don't know what you put in them. And if you get a chance, we would love to have you sign up for snacks. So if you could, if you would like to bring snacks on an evening, we would love for you to do that. And okay, just want to look back at what happened Friday night. But before we do, I do have one more announcement. The Oceanside crew, Bob and Keith, who go every Sunday at 3 o'clock to share with people at the pier, are just looking for people who would come and pray. And they're forming a prayer table that people would just sit and pray while they shared Christ with people. And maybe you don't feel comfortable sharing, but you would want to support them in prayer. And so if you can come this Sunday, 3 o'clock to the Oceanside Pier, they would appreciate it incredibly. Two new, I hate to put you on the spot.
Mark and Renee Choi.
Mark and Renee, thank you for coming. If you don't mind, we have signups where you can put your email address, Mark and Renee. All right, we went to Cruising Grand last Friday, and we had a great time. It was so much fun, so many people, and here's some pictures of some new friends that I have that I got a chance to share Christ with, and I used everything that I taught you. Walked through, I did the $20 thing. They laughed when I offered them $20 for naming the 10 commandments, and shared the stoplight illustration, the king and his mother illustration, and they were interested but didn't cross that line. But that's okay, because it's God who does the closing. And so I gave them all some further information so they could follow up on that. That's what it looks like at night at Cruising Grand. There's Bob with two interested individuals with his chart. And Bob with many more individuals in his chart. You can't believe that chart, what happens. There's some more of our crew standing there. Hi, Leon. Leon joined us. He finally found us, he and his daughter. They searched all over. That place is crowded, hard to find somebody. All right. We got a few minutes. I'm hoping that we can get some stories in, just some short stories of people who were there. Come on down if you'd like to share. Come on up, Bob. Bob and I hung out. We got two Bobs, so we'll let this Bob go first.
I'm not used to walking up to strangers and talking about my relationship with the Lord. Just doesn't sound kosher. But I started following him around, and I watched him, and we got onto a side street there's some restaurants. I forgot what street that was.
Esco Gelato is right there.
Yeah.
Everybody knows Esco Gelato.
And there were two young guys that kind of approached us, and we approached them. And both of them work at LA Fitness. And I started talking to Marco, and Steve started talking to Samuel. And so my approach is a little bit different from Steve. He's more professional and he's more technical. And I just get right down to the bare facts. And I said, do you have a relationship with the Lord? And he said, well, kind of. And I said, I would like to invite you to our church. And I just went through this simple things about what our church is like and so forth. And he said, I'm interested. So he says, the only problem, if I come at 8 o'clock, I have to leave by 8:30 because I have to be at work by 9 o'clock. So I said, well, I'll look for you and I'll find a seat and you can sit and listen to the music. It's the best in San Diego. Well, he didn't show up, but I've got his card. I've got his information. And I know that sometimes it doesn't work out right away, but I'm not going to give up on him. Nice young man. We connected. He gave me his info, and I gave him my info.
He works all day Saturday. He works Saturday and Sundays. How about that, to wipe it all out? So, Bob, talk about one example.
Now, what Steve and Bob failed to mention was that Friday night at Cruising Grand was fire engine night. So we would get halfway through the presentation and go, and they would be going like this. But they kind of hung in there. We were set up on the north side of Grand. I was set up about a half a block from where Emanuel Faith's choir was and band, which was, by the way, incredible. It kind of provided a nice background music for us. And Keith, who's not here tonight, but he was about 2 blocks down. He had a terrific time sharing the chart. There was one 9-year-old boy that prayed to receive the Lord, and a lot of seeds planted. I got going with the riddle on the chart. There were about 3 or 4 groups that came by and trying to figure the riddle out, and right at the in trying to go into the next page, they kind of left, okay? But then a father and son came by, and they were obviously very, very good friends. And so I started to go through the chart with them, and I had the impression that they both knew the Lord because they were answering the questions. So I got up to the very last page. Would you like to personally receive Jesus Christ as your Savior and Lord? And Sean, the 28-year-old son, I looked at him and tears started to well up in his eyes. And we went through John 1:12, that you can be part of his family. You can be a child of God, part of his family. And then would you like to receive Jesus Christ as your Savior and Lord? And we went through the prayer. And through the prayer, it was a waterfall, which is incredible. And at the end, I just very simply asked him, I says, Sean, did you pray that prayer sincerely? Did you pray that prayer sincerely? Yes, I did. And then I went through kind of a follow-up. Then I asked him a question. I said, Sean, somebody has been praying for you, right? And he kind of nodded. I said, who would that be? And he said, my dad. And they both did kind of a hug at the time. It was really amazing. And so we kind of decided that this was really a divine appointment, and gave them some information about Emanuel Faith. They live in Escondido. So gave them some information about the times that the youth group met, the young adults, as well as the Sunday morning services, what have you. And then I've got to tell you another story. There are a couple other young people that came by, and they responded. And then Alan was with me on the north side of the street. So about 7:30, it got really dark. And I says, well, Alan, I guess that's it. We can pack up. And Alan says to me, She said, oh, there's light on the other side of the street. We could go to the other side of the street and set up. So we did. And then that's when we saw Steve and some of the others and had an opportunity again to present the chart. And in one particular instance, there were teens that came by from Oak Glen High School. And there were 3 guys and 3 girls. The 3 girls were believers who went to Emanuel Faith. The 3 guys were not believers who received the Lord. So I mentioned to the gals, I said, now here's the challenge for you. You know, these young men are new believers, and I would love to see you be able to get them involved with the youth group at Emanuel Faith. And they all said, yeah, we can do that. So it was a very interesting night, a lot of fun, and I appreciate Steve's encouragement, you know, with us and what we do as well. So.
Interesting was that the LA Fitness guys came up to me. Samuel says, I'm an ambassador for LA Fitness. And I said, that's interesting. I'm an ambassador for Christ. And then I went through all the stories that I told you about. I went through the stories, and I'll tell you, Samuel was right with me, and he was so interested. And so I found out that they work on Saturday, Sunday. I go to that club. So what did I do Saturday? I went there, sat down with Samuel. Marco was out, and Samuel and I talked for a while. I said, are you a reader? He said, yes. I said, I've got a book for you. He says, what is it? I said, it's called The Story of Reality by Greg Koukl. Would you read it? He said, yes, I will. And so next weekend, guess what? I've got a divine appointment. I'm going to take the book, The Story of Reality, to Samuel. And if Marco's there, I have 2 books. So I'm going to give Marco a book also. So you never know. You know, it's a privilege to be there. I know Bob said, after hanging out with you, I've realized that it's not that hard. And that's the encouragement we want for you, that just hang out, watch how it works. You'll see that it is not that hard to share your faith. You are much more prepared than you can believe. And so every Sunday, you have a chance to join the group at Oceanside. They'll step aside. They'll let you share. You can buy one of the booklets for $20. You can study up, and it would give them great pleasure for you to say, can I do it next? They would just go, please, because they want to train you up and let you be part of the excitement of sharing Jesus with people and sharing grace. The same grace that you have received, you'll be passing on to others. Well, let me bring Gary up here. We're just thankful for what happened. And Father, we talked to a lot of people on Cruising Grand, and I just pray that these were decisions for Christ that were lasting ones that you gave them your Holy Spirit as they trusted in you, in your Son. And we're thankful for the divine appointments that happened. Pray for anybody here who wants to get involved, that maybe on a Sunday they will go over to the Oceanside Pier and join up and hang out with Bob and Keith and the others. And so I just pray for tonight. Use Gary as he makes a case for the Bible and shows how we can support this to a world that thinks the Bible is nothing but fables. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
I have a few more copies of the outline for the next 2 weeks. Anybody need one? Okay. Uh-oh, there's more hands than there are outlines. All right. As long as we got your name, I sent the outlines out via email. I think they're, hi there. Maybe a couple out that way. Any more over this way? Jim down there. Still have one? Okay. Out that way? So Steve and I, as we were making some plans for this fall series of classes, ended up on the same wavelength. We decided everything I thought of fit right in with what he wanted to do, and we hadn't talked about it. And we said, hey, everything's coming up Bible. So our plan is for these next few weeks to focus different areas within the Bible itself. So tonight, what I want to do, and next week. So it's a 2-week thing. So if you see the outline and it says like 4 pages worth, it's like that's 2 weeks. So don't feel like we're going to cover all that tonight. So it's 2 weeks worth. So this night and next Thursday, we're going to take a look at, you might think of it this way, the Bible at 30,000 feet. And I'll explain why in just a second. Usually when we get together and talk about the Bible, pastor talks, or we go home and we study, it's a chapter, maybe. You know, tonight I'm in Acts right now, so Acts, I think I'm in 16. So tomorrow 17 and so on. Well, that's good. Or sometimes it's a selection of verses. We're looking at a topic or something, the protection of God, whatever it is. So we look up key verses, and that's the way we study the Bible. Maybe we follow, we go through a book, and then we say, I don't really want to keep reading these. I've already read this gospel. I want to read something different. So we hop to the Psalms, and then we hop to a New Testament letter or something. So we're all over the place, a book here, book there. Sometimes it's just the New Testament. We say, what's with the Old Testament? So we just look at the New Testament and we focus on that. Nothing wrong with these approaches. These work okay. Am I getting a lot of... Okay, is it me? Okay. Is it this? Okay. All right. Sorry, I know it drives people nuts when they hear something weird going on up front, so I apologize. Well, there's nothing wrong about doing this as our approach to the Bible. However, I think there can be kind of a danger that the Bible turns into like a little bunch of jigsaw puzzle pieces. When I grew up, I'd go to Sunday school classes, and one week it was Daniel and Lion's Den. Oh, that was good. Next week it was Jesus on the road to somewhere. Next week would be Isaiah, or it's Abraham. So they all seemed like little pieces. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I started fitting it all together. I know it seems strange, but it was like, hey, that's one big story. And it didn't seem like it at the time. It was a piece here, a piece there, a piece somewhere else. So for the next 2 weeks, what I'd like to do is treat it like a puzzle that we're going to put the pieces together. And we're going to look at it historically, culturally, geographically, all those things, because my hope is, maybe you're already there, but I didn't get there till just a few years ago, that the Bible all of a sudden became very real to me, that those were real people. They had dirt under their nails. They walked on the road. They got their feet dirty. They talked to each other. These were real places. There were up hills and there were down hills and there were valleys and there were oceans and there were lakes and rivers. And all of a sudden, it just seemed a lot more real to me. And so that's what I'm hoping comes through, that it's not a once upon a time fairy tale. You notice that, by the way, once upon a time? There's no time in a fairy tale, is there? It's not like fairy tale 1942. I mean, they don't do that. It's just once upon a time. So it's like timeless. And the Bible's not timeless. It was in a place. It was, there were people who were rulers. There were groups coming in and people moving out, all sorts of things going on. And so that's what I really want to look at for the next couple of weeks, so that you begin to really feel the dirt under the nails and that kind of approach. So let's start with just taking a look at what's called the ancient Near East, ANE. And you'll recognize today this would be what? Yeah, that's Turkey. There's the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt hasn't changed, huh? What an old country there. Persian Gulf, lots of problems with tankers coming back and forth here. It's causing a lot of problems. What you might notice here, too, is you got these two major rivers that come here, the Tigris and the Euphrates. I'm sure you've heard of those. And the area around those rivers, of course, got early civilizations because the rivers were there. So you have places where you could put crops and things like that. And the term was Mesopotamia, which means just between the rivers. Like hippopotamus has got that Potamia right in it, so it's called river horse. So it's something to do with rivers, part of the root word. So you got Mesopotamia here. I want you to keep in mind, don't worry about all these other nations listed up here, but you got Mesopotamia here. You got Egypt over here. And so with those rivers, that's where the civilizations kept coming and going. Egypt would grow strong, and then it would fade. Over here, somebody in this area of Mesopotamia would come on the scene, become stronger, and then fade. And so you had these civilizations coming and going. Well, here's the problem. Canaan sits in the middle. So this is kind of like a nutcracker, and poor Canaan is like the nut that's in the nutcracker. Whoever was over here, and we'll talk about different groups, they might be on the rise, and they come over here to make sure the Egyptians stay in their place. And there's Canaan in the middle. So whoever's in Canaan is looking back and forth, and they're seeing this group come marching through. That group would say to them, whose side are you on? And you had to make a very good decision, because if you said, I think the Egyptians can help me, sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. If you guessed wrong, you're in big trouble. So I just want you to think about that notice there's no civilization in here. Why? Yeah, it's hot desert, isn't it? So you've got this thing, it's called the Fertile Crescent. And what it means is kind of like an upside down U. The civilizations were like this along the coast and down into Egypt. So that's kind of the setting, the big picture of where things are. One thing that's always cracked me up is the Hittites up here. Up until about 100 and some years ago, people said, hey, the only place the Hittites are mentioned in the Bible. We can't trust the Bible. There's probably no Hittite empire. And then guess what they did? They dug up the Hittite empire. So there we go. So the Bible comes through very, very well when it comes to history and all. Okay, so any questions on these? Otherwise, I'm going to keep moving. But if you have any questions, just feel free to, you don't have to wait till we're done. Okay, so we keep moving. Well, let's get a little tighter focus. Let's look at the land of Palestine itself. The green is obviously the lower land. And when you get up to the oranger scenes here, you got some higher mountains. And then look at this, for heaven's sakes. You got this deep, deep valley. Now, I have never been over there. I bet some of you have. And you probably are much better at this than me trying to wing it here. But this is part of what's called the Great Rift Valley. It's a big earthquake zone that goes clear down into Africa. And so Sodom and Gomorrah were probably right about here. So a lot of people think there's a monster quake, and there was gases that escaped from the quake and caught on fire. I mean, you could imagine all sorts of terrible devastation as a result of that. It doesn't mean God didn't cause it, but I'm just saying it's a possibility of something like that occurring. So you got I can't see it on this one, but you got Jericho down here. Some people think that may be one of the oldest towns ever anywhere. And so you got this nice smooth area here. So you got traffic, you got roads. The major road would go up down that way. You got Jerusalem sitting actually in a high point. So when people would say in the Old Testament, let us go up to Jerusalem, I don't know about you, but when I read a map, I always think up is at the top. Is that just me? Okay, let's go up to L.A. Okay, well, L.A. really isn't up. It's, almost sea level. So if they say, let's go up to Jerusalem, they're not kidding. If they were in Galilee, they would go up to Jerusalem because they're talking elevation. So if they're down here, they're going up physically. Jerusalem's about 2,500 feet. So it's like halfway from here to Palomar Mountain. So that gives you an idea. The Rift Valley, I forgot. Dead Sea is like, 1,500 feet below sea level, something like that? Huge. Huge difference. If you want to see the land, to just see the variation of the land, imagine it sliced sideways now. So here's the Mediterranean. There's that area where armies can march up and down real easily. You got the high point up here. Here's Jerusalem. And then look at that valley. Drops way down there, and there's the Great Rift Valley. When Jesus tells that story about the guy the Good Samaritan story, where the guy's going to go down to Jericho, the whole crowd that heard that kind of went, phew, because from Jerusalem, you have to do a lot of ziggy-zags, to get yourself down to Jericho. And there's a lot of places, if you want to be a robber, you could hide out, because here comes a group that's kind of, off. Nobody can see them at a distance. You grab them, punch the cookies out of them, and take what you want and head off. So it wasn't surprising that a guy got taken out there. So people hearing that story, they would have gone, ooh, which we miss these days. So let's get started. We'll take a look at Genesis first. We'll look at the 5 books. We're not going to do every book, obviously. It's 30,000 feet, so we're not going to spend time there. But you've got the first 5 books of Moses called the Torah, the Law. And we want to look at Genesis especially. Gosh, so much goes on in Genesis, doesn't it? Some of the greatest stories and some of the greatest Bible characters. Just Genesis is just loaded with good things. But I want to focus on 2 things about what we encounter when we meet the God in Genesis, the Judeo-Christian God. He's very different than other gods that we've met over the years in different cultures. So we'll look at that. And then something, because we're in such a scientific age, if it's possible, I want to get across and do away with this idea that Christianity and religion, opposes science. It doesn't. Christianity is one of the great supporters of science. And we'll talk about that as far as why that is when you look at Genesis. So what about the biblical God compared to other gods? Not just back then, but just almost any gods throughout time. Think about the Greek gods, for instance. Our God is a God before nature. He's there, and then he creates nature. That isn't the case with some of the Babylonian gods and the other gods. They come about after nature is already there. So which one is more prior and which one has the best thing going is nature, and then the other gods kind of, all the gods come along after that. So nature is predominant over the gods. That's not the Christian view, the Judeo-Christian view. You had God first, then he creates nature. He's a single being. Do you get single beings in the other gods? Often you get a whole panoply of them, don't you? The Greek gods. You ever study some of those? How many gods are there? I don't know. I kind of lost count. The Hindu gods, thousands of Hindu gods. And he's a careful creator, isn't he? It strikes me almost like a piece of artwork when you read Genesis, because he does part of it and he steps back and he goes, that's good. And he steps forward again, he does a little bit more, and he backs off and he looks at it again and goes, yeah, I like how that's turning out. Kind of a Bob Ross approach. Is that dating me? You guys know what I'm talking about? I love Bob Ross. That's got to be the most soothing voice I've ever heard. If you're ever up late, you think you can't sleep, just put on a Bob Ross video. You're out in about 5 minutes. Between him and Mr. Rogers, it was like ultimate Somonex. But God comes across as a really careful creator. Is that true in the other gods? They're sloppy and they fight each other, and it's just like the Three Stooges, except it's on a God level. It's pretty weird stuff. He's an ethical God. Are the other gods ethical? You read something about the Greek gods and all? That, if they found a woman, they wanted to rape her, and they were cheating on each other, and they were jealous of each other, and it was just awful. It's just like, I don't know, fraternity or something, just crazy people. Am I better off to go without this? Yeah, okay. Okay, I can try that. Yeah. Okay, I got to cut this. Sorry about that. Hello? All right. You want me just to add some popping sounds just so you get used to it? Okay. This God that you meet in the Bible can't be manipulated, can he? You can't say a certain prayer like it's a vending machine and have that God do something for you. He's going to do what he's going to do. He's sovereign. You're not. But many of these other religions, they have little gimmicks you do, and God will do whatever it is for you. You do a certain dance, you sacrifice a kid, you cut yourself, whatever it is, and it doesn't work. We saw that with the prophets of Baal. Remember that story? What about modern science coming from the Jews? Well, think again about the God that's revealed there permeated the idea of Western civilization, and they found things like this. They said, the God that you encounter in Genesis is rational. He doesn't do anything whimsically. Well, how would that lead towards science, do you think? If God is rational, yeah, Tim? Yeah, there are going to be set rational reasons the universe does what it does. A planet's not going to go around the sun one way and then next orbit go around the other way. The sun's going to always rise in the east and then head to the west. It's not going to surprise you. It's not going to go north-south. I mean, if God's rational, it may be that the world is rational. God's separate from his creation, but not all religions say that, do they? There's animism where God's in things. And so if God's in stuff, what would you do? Would you go out and catch a fish and look at the fish? Not really, because that's God. Why would you mess with it? Why would you cut a tree down to look at the tree? Would you do anything with animals? You wouldn't mess with nature because God's part of it. But we say, no, God is separate from his creation. And God's world is real. What do the Eastern religions say? It's Maya. It's an illusion. Are you going to investigate an illusion? How much time would you spend investigating illusion? That doesn't make any sense at all. But if it's a real world, you can go out there and you can encounter it. You're really encountering something. God's unchanging. Now we're back to those ideas. Those laws don't change, do they? God's unchanging. We're not going to see a different, like Tim was saying, different constant for gravity or, whatever it is. It'll stay the same. And then after all, humans are made in his image. Now, it doesn't mean we look like him, but we at least have a possibility for some kind of rationality. So when we go out there and we look at the world, we can use our minds. Our minds are not perfect, obviously, but we can figure out some things about the world. It was Kepler that said, he's the one that worked on the astronomical orbits of planets and how they circled the sun and stuff like that. He said, I'm just thinking God's thoughts after him. Isn't that a neat way to think about science? I'm just thinking God's thoughts after him. And then something else that we get from the Jews back in Genesis. God blesses Abraham. He says some things are going to happen because of you. It looks like history is going someplace. Is this always the way ancient people saw history? No, many of them saw it as cyclical. Things happen, and then more things happen, then those things happen again. They just keep happening. You're not getting anywhere. There's no point to anything. You grow up, and you have a job, and you die, and your kids do the same thing, and that's it. That's the whole universe is going to be a cycle. Hinduism believes in that. But that's not the Judeo-Christian view. Genesis says God set it up, and he set a track. History is actually going someplace. There's direction to the things that happen. And then notice in Genesis still, in the story of Abraham, did you notice he follows the Fertile Crescent? That's not an accident. He starts off in Ur, way over here. He ends up in Haran, and then heads down to the coast. And I don't know if you can appreciate that. I didn't appreciate it till a while back, but I started thinking about that. Think about what God says to him. He says, you grew up in Ur. Yeah. Okay. And you're in Haran. You're still part of the Fertile Crescent. Life is good. Yeah. Okay. I want you to give up all of that, and I want you to go to the middle of nowhere. This isn't the civilization. Here's the civilization, and then here's the civilization. Here's some. He says, go in the middle of nowhere. And I don't know what the equivalent would be for us today. Hamul. El Centro, I don't know. I don't want to step on any toes. I'll find somebody after a pound me because they said it's a great place. But you know, you're going someplace where there wouldn't be great doctors, there wouldn't be great schools, there wouldn't be parks or anything like that. You're going, Death Valley. Years ago, I had my first college teaching job, and it was up in the Victorville area. Somebody once said that's just a large kitty litter box. It's like, well, yeah, something to that. They told my wife, they said, don't shop at night. They said, all the strange ones come out at night. Oh, okay. But so that was our experience, kind of like, I guess, Abraham went, so a little different. But I mean, just picture that. What a tremendous step of faith for this guy to say, okay, God's got something for me there. All right, I trust him. So no wonder he's considered a man of faith. He goes to the middle of nowhere, and God blesses him for that. Okay, I want to say something about the patriarchal period. So you got Abraham, and you got his offspring, et cetera, Jacob, and, all those people, Isaac. There are two things that they talk about in there that a lot of people get offended by. They read the Bible and go, good grief, look at all this polygamy. And then you understand that, but what's primogenitor? Heard that term before? That's where the oldest kid gets everything, the oldest boy. He gets everything. If you're second in line, tough. But you know what? The Bible is so subversive. Yeah, people in the Bible did this kind of stuff, but how did polygamy work out for them? Doesn't work out well at all, does it? It causes problem after problem after problem. You've got Jacob, you've got David, you got all these people that end up with sons that fight each other, and it's just a monstrous headache. It's terrible. So the Bible doesn't recommend it. It says it happened, and it's always bad results. The Bible undermines the other big thing, primogeniture. How does it undermine it? Do you notice all through the Bible, it's always the second son, not the first one, that gets all the good stuff? Abraham has two kids. Ishmael's first. He's outcast finally because it's Isaac that's the child of the blessing. Jacob and Esau. Esau's born first. Jacob rips him off, but he gets the blessing. And you see that again and again. What about David? Here comes Samuel with the oil. I just love that scene. I could just picture it. He goes up to the house and he sees all these big strapping guys sitting there going, so he takes the oil over and he says, this must be it. And God says, no. Okay, there's a guy flexing over there. I bet it's him. He goes over to the other guy. No. And he's gone through all the guys in the house. So I imagine he's going, that's it? And the dad says, well, we got this puny guy on the back taking care of sheep. We can't do anything else. Brings him in. God says, there's the one. That's the least likely as far as the human mind would think of. That'd be the last that you'd pick. So I really like that. The first shall be last. The Bible pushes that pretty hard. All right, then we get the Israelites. They said, they're in the land of Canaan, thanks to Abraham coming down there and all. But you know the story. The famine comes, they head down to Egypt. And then there's a verse that's kind of chilling in the Bible that says, there came a Pharaoh on the scene that did not know Joseph and did not know that family, did not know the Jews. And all of a sudden, they're not a help anymore. They're a hindrance, and they're down in Egypt. Well, later on, not these 2 weeks, but later on when we're holding one of these classes, I want to focus on, and surprise you probably because it surprised me, there's actual evidence. Not conclusive, not 100%, because we're talking ancient history, but there's some evidence that there were Jews in the land of Egypt. Now, have you heard anything about that? I mean, most people just go, well, I'm just taking it on faith. Well, you don't have to just take it on faith. They found, and I'll show you pictures in a different presentation later during these 12 weeks, but they found Semitic architecture in the land exactly where the Bible says the Jews were. It's called the land of Goshen. It's down where I'll show you a picture in a minute, but it's where the Nile spreads out and becomes a delta. So it's right in there. They found Hebrew slave names. They've got wall pictures of Semitic traders because they're wearing different clothes and they look different. They're not Egyptians. They found Semitic slaves depicted in drawings, all sorts of slaves there. Again, does it prove that it doesn't say these are Jews, these are, part of Joseph's family? It doesn't say that, but at least there's some indications. Okay, so here's that map I was talking to you about. There's that land of Goshen. My grandmother always said that. Am I the only one? She'd say land of Goshen. Never land of. It was that land o, like O with the apostrophe. Anyway, land of Goshen. So you got the Goshen area here, and the Jews come out, thanks to the Exodus, and they don't go up this way, do they? They don't take the road along the coast and just come into the land because God says go to the land. They go, oh, yeah, but then they cruise around this way and come in on the east side. Can you think of any reason for that, or have you read about that? Giants in the land, that's part of it. What did I say earlier about along here? This is flat, this is shallow, this is the main trade route. There are forts all along here. So do you really want to fight your whole way up there with these women and children? They don't. They bypass that and they sneak in and come in the back door and come in the land along here. So now we're talking about somewhere around 1300 BC, just to give you a time period here. We get a covenant, of course, very famous covenant, but it's not the only covenant in the Old Testament, is it? Can you think of any other covenants? The Abrahamic covenant. So God makes a covenant with Abraham. By the way, read that sometime. It's very interesting because you get these pots that are lit and they appear to be moving in the air because it's God that's doing it. I don't have time tonight, but just take a look. It's oh shoot, I forgot the chapter. But take a look because God is making a covenant with Abraham. But the way the covenant is done is really amazing. If I think about it, I'll send you some information. Anyway, so you got the Abrahamic covenant. You do have the Mosaic covenant, and I just put a note up there. It's a promise. It's like a contract. God says, I will do these things for you. You will do these things for me. So it's, I will be your God and you'll be my people. So the prophets later on, what do when they see the people are failing? They're failing the contract. So he'll come, whoever, Isaiah, let's say, he'll come to the people and he'll say, here's the contract. You signed the contract. You agreed to this, and now you've broken it. And terrible things are going to come as a result of that. And then, of course, we get the Davidic covenant. And then Jesus says he's going to bring the new covenant. So covenants kind of string along all through the Old Testament, clear on into the New Testament. But think of it as a contract. It's kind of like you and Home Depot. They'll provide the carpeting, you provide the money. All right, so we get the people in the land, but they don't really take over the land completely. They kind of take little enclaves, but they still have people here and there who oppose them. And you got the Moabites, you got all the Ammonites, you got all these ites. They're all over the place, and they're hostile to the Jews. And they'll attack, and they settle down. And you get the book of Judges, which is a really strange book. If you compare it to all the other books of the Bible so far, the books of the Bible have all gone in sequence. This happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. You get to the book of Judges, you can just pick a chapter and you could flip it around with any other chapter because it doesn't really matter. They're individual stories that don't connect with each other. The only thing they have in common is there's a cycle going on there, and here's the cycle. The Israelites are doing okay, and it sounds like us. As long as we're doing okay, then God's not as important. So I'm having a good time. Thanks, God. But enemies attack. And when the enemies attack, all of a sudden it pinches, and they suffer, and they call out to God. Please, God, send somebody. And God does. He's faithful. He uses somebody to rescue them. We'll talk about a few of them in just a minute. So somebody comes in and rescues them, then they're doing fine. Wash and repeat. And they do this chapter after chapter after chapter in Judges. And it doesn't really matter what order you put them in. Some of the famous, by the way, if you think about the word judge, you're probably picturing a courtroom and somebody with a gavel and a powdered wig. But these are just charismatic tribal leaders. So think of them that way. There's something about them that is so appealing. The Jews that are squabbling with each other, each of these individual tribes, say, we need help. You look like the one that can get us out of this mess. And so what surprises me is that they picked a woman. I mean, we're talking a very patriarchal society. Deborah must have been an amazing person, don't you think? Wow. They're so desperate, they say, you take it. And she becomes their tribal leader. If you have a chance, again, take a look at Judges 4 and Judges 5, because you get the same story told two different ways. Judges 4 is the story of Deborah and her picking an army captain. They go out and stomp on this bad guy. Then Judges 5 is the poetry. That's the poetry of that same episode. So you can hear what a narrative sounds like and what a poem sounds like describing the same event. And that you can see what poetry does. It's very obvious. Poetry does something very, very different. So even if you don't like poetry, you'll like this one because it doesn't rhyme. It doesn't sound like a Hallmark card. Okay, so the Jews didn't rhyme their poetry. So if you say, well, it's probably just missing the rhyme because we translated. No, they didn't rhyme their poetry in Hebrew either. So just take a look at it, though, because it really is different. It'll seem very imaginative the way the poem is done. So that's Judges 5. Samson. How long do you think Samson was the judge for Israel? Anybody have a guess? I mean, if you read the stories, it sounds like he screws around and gets himself into all sorts of trouble with the women, and all of a sudden he's hauled off and he's blinded, and then he gets his strength back and brings the house down, as they say. It doesn't sound like he was a judge very long, does it? I mean, if you just read that. Well, when they write these books in the Bible, they're being very selective. All they want to tell you about is Samson is a mess up. He's done things wrong. So they focus on mess up after mess up. But if you read the fine print in the Bible there, he was a judge for 20 years. I think he must have been actually pretty good. And yeah, had a lot of failures, didn't he? But that was interesting. And then the Gideon story. I don't know why. I guess because I have an active or feverish imagination, whatever the word is. But I picture this one scene. I just love it to death. Gideon, in chapter 6, we meet him, and it says, the angel of the Lord came where Gideon was threshing wheat in a wine press. Well, wait a minute. Where are you supposed to be threshing wheat? Outside, because you throw the wheat, after you crush it, you throw the wheat up, the heavy grain falls, the chaff goes, and it heads off. He's doing it inside. He's doing it in a wine press. Why? To keep it from the Midianites. So does this seem like a real macho guy that says God will take care of us? No, he's going. I don't know how he's getting the chaff to separate from the wheat, but there he is. And God, and the angel comes and says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." And I'm picturing him going. So is there hope for all of us? Yeah, I feel like the first part of the story. I'm the Gideon in the wine press. By the way, read the story sometime because he hides behind his dad in one scene. It's hilarious. He goes out in the middle of the night, knocks down a Baal pole or something like that, and the people in the village are upset because they said, "Great, now we've gotten Baal ticked at us." They say, "Who did that?" They say, "We think it was Gideon." So they go up there with whatever they're going to take it out on Gideon. And Gideon goes in the house, and the dad comes out and says, "Get out of here." Is that a great story? And Gideon's going, "Yeah, get him, Dad." This is the mighty warrior. All right. But he does get used later on. If you've ever seen a Bible in a hotel room put out by the Gideons, what's on the cover? Yeah, it's a little jug that has a torch in it. That is from the story of Gideon, isn't it? When he goes out and fights the Midianites and he cracks that open. It's like psychological warfare because all of a sudden, all these lights come on. But anyway, so that's a great story. So those are the judges. Well, the people, they're okay with these judges, but they look around at everybody, every other nation. They go, every other nation has a king. We need a king. That would be so great. And God's saying, I'm your king. They say, yeah, we can't see you. And we can't, there's that thing about humans want to worship something. And so how about a guy with a fancy robe and a nice crown? That'd be pretty cool. So they go, give us the king. Samuel says, now we're in the book of Samuel, he says, really? You want a king? This is what the king will do. He'll take your sons and make them serve with his chariots. He'll take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He'll take 1/10 of your grain and give it to his officials, your men servants, and the best of your cattle he'll take for his own use. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief. Some things don't change. Is this government or is this government at work? The Jews actually gave up way more than 10%. So, they were taxed right and left. So they said, we want a king. He said, really? Here's what you're going to have. Your people will be taken from you. Your friends will be taken. You're going to be serving this government or this king with your money or with your offspring. So there was the warning. But did they listen? No. So they get kings. I won't spend any time on Saul. But what about David? So here's my question to you. David gets more space. He gets more words devoted to him in the Old Testament than anybody, including Moses. So do you have any thoughts on that? You've probably read some stories about David. Why do the writers, book after book, even in the New Testament, make references to David? And you got the Star of David, which is on their flag. So even today, David's a big deal. Any ideas why? And there's, by the way, it's plural. There are a lot of reasons, but why would we make such a big deal? Why did the Jews make such a big deal about David? Okay, he's a warrior. He's a fighter. He stomps on the enemies of Israel for a long, long time. Yeah, he kills Goliath. He's a writer. He's the writer of the Psalms, many of the Psalms anyway. That's an odd combination. You don't get that very often, do you? Good writing, which is more imaginative and philosophical, combined with physical strength and going out and whomping on people. How many times have you ever seen that in history? Very rarely. Teddy Roosevelt comes to mind. He fought, and he was one of the best writers ever. The guy wrote these amazing books. Winston Churchill, he put out books about the history of World War II, and he was a fighter. But it's pretty rare. You can just about count on one hand people that could do those two things. But David's known for even more than that. Jim? Yeah, over and over again. He does some awful things, doesn't he? But he keeps coming back. He says, oh, God, I need you, and he humbles himself and crawls in the dirt and comes back to God. He always comes back. Tim? Yeah, he does. Yeah. Anything else you can think of for David? Yeah. Michael?
Shepherd king, which is a type of Christ.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. Taking care of the flock. Let me share, you've hit several of these, so I'll go past them pretty fast. We heard that one. We heard that one. How about this? He led the nation politically as well, didn't he? He's the one that decided where to put the capital. Think back to American history. Why does Washington, D.C. end up our capital? It's not because of the location. It was swampy. It was terrible. It was a compromise. What do you mean, Paul? There you go. It's that kind of on that dividing line between the north and the southern kingdoms. And those tribes are always kind of bickering with each other. It was kind of a split that had been there for a long, long time. And the same thing with us. We say, okay, we don't want it in Massachusetts because it'll tick off all the South Carolinians and stuff. So they put it kind of on the border there. Made a nightmare in the Civil War, didn't it? Because they're always having to defend Washington. Just you had a stone's throw away. There was Richmond, and there's Lee, and he's coming all the time, and they're just having to fight to save their capital. Yeah, Jim.
It's close to where George Washington lived.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, good point. So let's think about David as a political leader. He's the one that captured Jerusalem. It wasn't in the hands of the Jews until David came along. and he makes it the capital, brings the ark. There's something else he's known for. And then, of course, he's the recipient, isn't he, of the promised Messiah. The line of David talks a lot about the line of David, the son of David. And then you mentioned that he's a literary guy. So put all that together. How many people in the whole history of the world have been able to do any of these things well, much less that combo, politics, warrior, and literary person? So again, I think we're back to Churchill and Roosevelt. If you have another nomination, let me know, but I think about those. I wanted to show you just real quickly here what we're talking about. Why would David pick Jerusalem? It's a good compromise. But the other thing it had going for it, this is supposed to show it kind of 3D, if you can picture that. So you got this huge valley here. It's called the Kidron Valley. You got this huge valley here called the Hinnom Valley. So it's kind of hard to attack Jerusalem because it's sitting up almost like a fortified position. You have to attack it from uphill. So that's a great spot if you want to put a capital city. It's pretty defensible. Here's the Mount of Olives, by the way, out here. What I find interesting about the Hinnom Valley at the bottom here, the Jews would take all of their trash from the city and bring it out this gate and dump it there and set it on fire. It was kind of a perpetual fire, just burned all the time because you always had more junk that you were taking out, dead animals, just the debris of life. And when Jesus comes along, he's talking about hell. And what does he do? He points out to that. And he says, he calls it Gehenna. What is Gehenna? It means the Hinnom Valley. So it's that word Hinnom or Gehenna. And he's saying that's what hell is like. I mean, he's just trying to metaphorically get people to think about where the fire never stops burning. Those people could look out there and go, oh, wow, okay. All of a sudden, that's a real image for these people to see that. So how is David doing at this time? Well, he did pretty well because over here, you don't have any big kingdom rising. Remember I said these poor guys in the middle are kind of like the nut and the nutcracker. Well, there's nothing big that's threatening, and Egypt was going through a period of decline. So around the year 1900, right in there, he can expand his empire because there's no threat, no external threat, and he stomped on the local problems, but there's no big threat from either area here. So that was a good time for David. Spread his kingdom up a little bit to the north. And then you got his son Solomon coming along. Can you imagine how beautiful that must have been if you're going up to Jerusalem to 2,500 feet and you make that turn or whatever, and it's the first view of that city and you can see this temple, how beautiful that must have looked. No wonder they would sing psalms and songs to God, as they walked up there to see that. So we think of Solomon, we think of that temple. I want to focus a little bit more on the wisdom literature that comes out of Solomon's time period, those proverbs associated with him. By the way, the Bible is not the only book to have proverbs. There are a lot of ancient languages that have, we still have them today. Different cultures have proverbs, but I wanted to share a few of them with you here. A prudent man sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. Has that gone out of style? I don't think so. A prudent man sees danger and takes refuge. Now, maybe 8 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it is, it might apply to the people that took on more house and more house and more house, thinking their job would always do fine or that the economy would always boom, and then the economy sank. And some of these people were underwater, as far as their house and all. And some of that may be a lack of prudence. In some cases, it's just bad timing or something.
People in North Carolina going through that very thing tonight.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, good point. That's something we can pray for, by the way. A man who lacks judgment derides his neighbor, but a man of understanding holds his tongue. I don't know about you, but I'm always sorry when I sin something and I hadn't really let it go and just thought about it for a while. Am I the only one? You put send, you hit send, you go, I shouldn't have done that. I'm always then having to send a follow-up saying, sorry about that. So better, what was it? Was it Lincoln that said, better to be thought a fool, be quiet, be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt? Yeah. So that doesn't go out of style. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is stupid. Well, why don't you come right out and tell us what you think? I had a guy a few semesters back at Palomar, and he failed the class. And I saw him the next semester walking around. And so I said, hi, how you doing? He said, oh, yeah. I said, I remember you. You're the guy that flunked me. I said, wait a minute. I said, you're the one that didn't turn the work in. I was like, well, it's my fault. He who works his land will have abundant food, but he who chases fantasies lacks judgment. I don't want to step on any toes. First thing I think of is lottery. Okay, so if I've offended you, I'm sorry about that. But I look at these Indian casinos and I think they're built on fantasies. They're doing way better than me. Do you have a casino-sized house anyplace? I don't. I mean, they're making money off of the rest of us that go there and drop the money. Because, in my view, I think you're chasing a fantasy. You got one chance in a zillion. You're going to get hit by a meteorite before you're going to win the lottery. Okay, then I want you to think about these little bits of wisdom. Just curious to know what you think. The fear of the Lord adds length to life, but the years of the wicked are cut short. Is that always true? Absolutely not. Do you know some old wicked people? I do. Do you know some really wonderful people who've died young? Yeah, and I think of Nabil Qureshi, who is he converted from Islam. He was writing books and a powerful guy for the kingdom of God. And he got, I think it was stomach cancer, and he's gone. And he had, a young child, I think one, and a wife, and it just tore my heart up. Melinda Pinner, who works with Stand to Reason, Greg Kokel's organization. She was up on a ladder last Christmas fixing lights, fell, cracked her head, and she hasn't come out of it yet. She's in this awful coma. And maybe someday she'll be okay, but I mean, she's just really suffering. So you look at that and you go, well, wait a minute, that doesn't always come true. So what are we talking about here? Does that mean the Proverbs aren't true? They're false? They're what? Good point. They're general principles. Do you know what a bell curve is like? That in most experiences of life, whether it's IQ or whether it's height or whether anything, most people are in the center and then you got a few outliers on one end or the other end. Same with the weight we carry or whatever it is. And so the book of Proverbs is kind of taking it down the middle, saying this is what you can generally expect, but you're not given the promise. So it's got general guidelines there, but it's not promising because we know some exceptions to this rule. But frankly, people that do live in a wicked lifestyle, whether it's drug addiction or other things, messing with, mafia kind of stuff or whatever, I mean, there are a lot of short lifespans out there because of the choices that they've made. Here's one that you got to think about a little bit. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you'll be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, or he'll be wise in his own eyes. So what is that saying? Answer him or don't answer him. You decide. I like that. Don't answer him. It's like a tar baby. You're going to hit him, and then you're going to get sucked into it. Answer him, or he's going to think he's right. So I guess you have to decide kind of, when you want to go that way. My favorite one, I think, is chapter 31. Anybody know what's going on in the 31st chapter in Proverbs? Some people, by the way, because it's about the same as a month, they'll read through one chapter of Proverbs a day, which isn't a bad idea. I haven't done that, but it'd be a neat idea. What's going on? Did you know, John?
Well, it's about a woman who works with her hands.
Yeah, it's the ideal woman. And talk about being, a lot of people think the Bible puts women down and stuff, which I don't, you can make a great argument against that. But take a look at chapter 31. This is a woman who can do everything. She is in the home, but she goes out and she buys land and the community honors her. And she does everything really well. And what's interesting is that chapter is an acrostic. Every verse starts with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So in other words, if we were doing that here, we'd have our first verse start with A, next verse B. But they do it with the Hebrew alphabet. So you know what they're saying there? Basically, the ideal woman is from A to Z, just like our alphabet. So it's telling us that through this acrostic procedure. So it's a great chapter to read. Well, Solomon disappears, and now he's been holding the land together, but there have been these frictions and these difficulties, and his son doesn't have the same star power, gets bad advice. If you read that, you'll see. And the whole kingdom just splits, falls apart. And what makes it awfully weird is the northern part is now called Israel, when before the whole land was called Israel. So if that confuses you later on with the stories of the kings, they say, here's the king of Israel. Well, that's the king of the northern 10 tribes. So there's 10 tribes up here, and there's just Judah and Benjamin in the bottom. That's called Judah. So does that make sense? You got actually two distinct places there. For the northern group, Samaria is their capital. Okay, down here it's still Jerusalem. So all of a sudden in books of Kings and Chronicles, you find these different kings as they rise and things happen to them. Usually it's really bad news. Most of them, they're terrible kings, and it really ruins the land. the prophets come in about this time. And we have major prophets, 4 of them, and we have a whole bunch of minor prophets. And they're out there telling the people, you've broken the covenant, watch out, judgment's coming, get your act together, do the right thing. And the people don't listen. And here comes the first of the major kingdoms from the east. Again, this is Mesopotamia. Assyria is the first big one that rises on the scene. And I'm going to share something with you in a second here. I hope it doesn't bother you. But I just wanted you to think about what this was like for the people in the land hearing that the Assyrians were coming. This is not just an army is coming. This is ISIS. In fact, this is ISIS on steroids. They make ISIS look like Boy Scout leaders. I don't know if you can see very well back there. Do you see some guys impaled on the top left? They've been skewered. That was not unusual. This is one of the Assyrian kings. I built a pillar over against his city gate, and I flayed all the chief men who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skins. Some I walled up within the pillar, some I impaled upon the pillar on stakes, and others I bound to stakes round about the pillar, many within the border of my own land. I flayed and I spread their skins upon the walls, and I cut off the limbs of the officers of the royal officers who had rebelled. This is not unusual. This is horrific kind of stuff. They were the masters of scare tactics and coming into a community. You'd better open your gates. If they took over from you, they had these big iron hooks, and they would hook you under the jaw here and hook it to a rope and then drag you away. And they went out of their way to be cruel. And they would boast, just like this guy boasted. So they come up in the 700s now, and they come up against the northern 10 tribes and take them off. Their idea of defeating somebody was to take them off into captivity and bring other people in. So they never had their homeland. And it was kind of hard to revolt when you're taken off and you're an alien somewhere else. And so maybe you've heard that story about the 10 lost tribes. You ever heard that? It's those 10 northern tribes. We can't find them today. Nobody knows exactly where they went. You get all sorts of people making claims. It's kind of funny. There were people that used to say it was Britain. Britain ended up with the 10 lost tribes. I don't think so. But they just kind of disappear from history. So that's a great mystery. Where'd they go? I don't know. So no wonder the Jews of Jesus' day, when they would go up to Samaria, they were unhappy because they thought of these people as half-breeds, mongrels. They weren't pure Jews anymore because they were all these other groups that had come in. So when Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, that'd be like us telling the story of a good ISIS. Because they go, what do you mean a good Samaritan? There's no such thing as a good Samaritan. And Jesus tells a story about this guy lavishing all this care on that poor, beat-up, wounded guy. And it would just horrified his readers. Today we just go, okay, that's nice, a good Samaritan. We even have these laws now, the Good Samaritan laws. But for Jesus to tell that story, again, we're out of that culture. We can't imagine it. But it would have just horrified. People's eyes would have flown open. The Good Samaritan? Are you kidding? They have it's called a prism, but it's just a piece of stone that Sennacherib, maybe you've heard that name before, he's in the Bible. He boasts about going up against the land and doing all this stuff in the land. But you know what's interesting? He says, yeah, and I went into Jerusalem and I shut up their king Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. But you know what he doesn't say? He doesn't say, and I defeated him. Do you know that story? It's in Isaiah. Here come the Assyrians. They knocked off the 10 northern tribes. Now they come to Jerusalem. They're going to take out the southern tribe. But what happened to them? What's that? Yeah, they surround Jerusalem. So he got that right. Yeah, he shut up Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. But I think it's interesting. He wrote this, and he's actually being honest. He doesn't say, yeah, and I beat him, and I took him off. I mean, he doesn't lie. He just says, I shut him up like a bird in a cage. And he says, let's move on to something else. But yeah, something like 100,000 Assyrians die as they're doing this siege of Jerusalem against Hezekiah. You know what? Because of time, I think I'll do this Babylon thing, then we'll stop, and we'll pick up next time. I'll go a little faster, and we'll do the rest of the Old Testament and New Testament. This is not the original, but this is a reproduction. Just to give you an idea of the beauty and the size of the Babylonian Empire, this is one of their gates called the Ishtar Gate. I mean, just look at it compared to the size of the people down here. So, good thing, this is the good news. All these groups of people came along alphabetically. Wasn't that thoughtful of them? The Assyrians are in the 700s. The Babylonians are the 600s. We're going to get next week to the Persians. A, B, P. Okay, well, there's no C. That's all right. I'm just happy it's A, B. So I can kind of keep that straight. So the Babylonians come along and kick down the Assyrians and take over. Read Nahum sometime. He's one of the minor prophets. He just revels in the defeat of Nineveh. He's just rubbing his hands and chortling about finally they get what's coming to them because of that horrific image of what the Assyrians were like. So here comes Babylon. And this time, though, they come down to the south. Remember, I told you if you're in Canaan, you better decide which side you're going to fight on. So here come the Babylonians. They said, whose side are you on? Well, the Jewish king says, Egypt will protect me. Oh, no, it was a bad choice. The Egyptians did not protect them. And the Babylonians come and they sweep off a lot of the leading Jews, take them into captivity. And they end up with a song like this that the Jews sing. Well, I don't know if they sing it, but they said, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. I mean, what would that be like to be taken out of your land? You've not only lost a battle, though you're not going to see the land of your ancestors. You're not going to go to the graves anymore of the people in your family that you buried. You're not going to see the site where you and your new bride, took your first walk. I mean, all that's gone. Total new geography, completely new. There on the poplars we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? It's a real sad lament there. So I'll leave it at that point, and we'll pick up next time. But just wonder if you have, Steve, you want to come up and see if anybody has any questions about either this or anything else, maybe something else you're dealing with this week?
Minor and major prophets, is it just the size of the book?
Yeah, just the length. It doesn't have to be about what we're talking about tonight. It can be anything you're curious about.
Yes, Bob.
The map you showed at the beginning with the names that are foreign to us.
You want me to dig it up?
How far back was that, and when did those names change to what they are now?
Oh, I don't know when they changed. You mean like Assyria or something like that?
Turkey.
Oh, I see. Well, I don't know, Turkey didn't become a nation until, was it late 1800s, early 1900s? Ataturk?
It was the
Early 1900s, right? 1920s. See, it was part of the Ottoman Empire at one time, but it wasn't like its own nation. And it was called the sick man of Europe up until World War I, and they lost to the Brits. And so I don't know when some of these other nations turned into the names that we have. Egypt's always been Egypt. That's kind of cool. John?
The last book of the Bible is not Revelation, it's maps.
And we keep bringing John here. Thank you, John. That touched my heart. That was an important thing to
Yeah.
my.
I think Syrians, what made the Syrians so strong? I mean, what was their background in making such a, I guess, a concrete?
I don't know. They just found out real early that if you scared the poo out of people, you could take over their land. You didn't have to fight as hard. I don't know what made them so darn tough. I mean, obviously life was cheap back then. So it wasn't like the Babylonians were really kind and nice people. It was only them. These guys, just people all around the areas there knew about them and dreaded to see them coming over the hill. If you have a chance, look in the section where they come up to Jerusalem. And so now you got the Assyrians surrounding Jerusalem, and they come up, they have an envoy, and they come up to the gates, and they look up there and they say, we want to talk to you. And so now you got the back and forth between the two, and they're even using psychology on the Jews at the gate. And the Jews at the gate said, could you speak in a different language rather than our language? Because they didn't want the other people up there to hear how bad the Assyrians were. So it's just interesting to see the psychological warfare going back and forth. I always picture the Lord of the Rings at the end of the last movie where they're all going up to the land of Mordor and they stand in front of this huge gate. And it is, that's my picture anyway of this. But yeah, I don't know why the Assyrians are especially bad, but they were just nasty. So by the way, in the book of Jonah, when God says to Jonah, what? Go to Nineveh. He goes, is Nineveh that way? Thanks. And he goes, he's kind of the anti-prophet, but I get it. I mean, he would say, hey, look, God, if I don't go, are you going to strike those people? And then he goes and he gives the shortest gospel message. I mean, Billy Graham takes 45 minutes. he would get up there and he just said, repent or God's going to destroy you. Done. He did the bare minimum. I think it's hilarious. Just read the book of Jonah. He goes, okay, I'm out of here. And he sits there waiting for God to go, and God doesn't do it. And he is so upset at the end. Come on, wipe these people out. That's a great book.
The Assyrians coming in and the Babylonians, these were judgments of God. Yeah. Don't just think that this just happened by chance. The northern kingdom had 20 kings. How many were bad? 20. 20 bad kings out of 20. That's when all these prophets are trying to warn the people. And God just was fed up and allowed the Assyrians in. How about the southern kingdom? There were 20 kings. How many bad? 17. 17 bad. There were 3 good ones. I don't know. I don't remember who they were, but that's amazing that there were at least 3 good ones, which is why the southern kingdom got to stick around a little longer before Babylonia came in and took them away. Yes.
Steve, what was the name of that book you mentioned earlier in this evening that you were getting for the young man, something in reality?
Yes, we actually studied it here as part of our apologetics, and it is a fabulous overview of the Christian faith by Greg Koukl. He put out 2 books that we always recommend. One is Tactics, How to Ask Good Questions. I can't recommend that higher, because that has influenced us, and many of you out here have been influenced because we keep teaching tactics. What do you mean by that, and how did you come to that conclusion? And then a second book that he followed up with is The Story of Reality. And in The Story of Reality, he's going to trace through 5 major themes the entire story of Christianity and of the Christian faith from beginning to end. And it's going to be God, man, Jesus, cross, and resurrection. Resurrection not only of Jesus, but of the end times. And so through those 5 major themes, you can explain to somebody the whole story of reality, that Christianity is true truth. It's just not a religion made up on a fable. It matches what the world is, and it's historical. And it's a great book to give to people. I buy them 6 at a time, and I've already given away 10. I'm going to give away 2 more, and I got to buy some more now because I give them to believers and non-believers because it can fulfill both needs.
Where do you get the books?
I go to Amazon. Because I'm a Prime. Amazon Prime, you get it in 2 days. I'm spoiled.
Hey, speaking of books, over there, we'll try to keep bringing books in, so maybe take a look sometime. We have Case for Christ, which we talked about last week. I've got over there a book called Peace Child. That's a terrific read about a missionary who goes out in the middle of nowhere and works with these people. It's a fabulous story. The author's been here at Emanuel Faith years back. He's a terrific writer. The third book is called Screw Tape Letters. It's by C.S. Lewis. It's a devil telling another devil how to mess up Christians' lives. So it's kind of like reverse psychology. You have to think of it that way. That's a good book, too. So you're welcome to take any of those books there.
Don Richardson is the author of Peace Child, and he also wrote it, Eternity in Their Hearts.
Yeah.
And boy, you talk about an impactful book. That book, he goes back and goes to all these tribes in the middle of nowhere. People say, how can you judge people in the middle of nowhere? Jesus hasn't spoken to them. They don't know anything about Jesus. And then he goes back and finds out how the gospel has broken through to these places that are so isolated. It's so impossible. And God does the impossible. And so there's one story after another, and it's a fascinating book. It's called Eternity in Their Hearts by Don Richardson, the author. And somebody get that book. Peace Child is a fabulous book.
By the way, these are all books that have been out all over the place. You can find them in used bookstores. You don't have to go buy new ones. That's what I'm doing. I just find them at the library, and they're trying to get rid of them for 50 cents or something. So if you just keep your eyes open, you can find all sorts of good Christian books. Well, let's close and then we'll stick around for you
Oh,
guys.
Bob, you have something?
Oh.
Just want to mention, we have more of those small charts, the 8.5 by 11 charts. So we've got 3 or 4, so we'll have them back in the back.
Yeah, they're what Bob presented, the illusion chart in big production. He's made it into a booklet for $20. And you can learn from the booklet. You can share from the booklet with somebody one-on-one. And then you can study it and then show up on a Sunday and join the team and get involved. Yes, Alan.
How many $20 bills did you give away?
I almost had to give away one because I bumped into a pastor. And he starts going through, but fortunately he missed one. And I said, okay, that's enough. I'm going to keep my 20. I put it in my pocket real quick.
Well, I'll pray and then stick around if you want to. We still have some munchies over there. Father, I thank you for this group coming out tonight and their interest. And I pray that you'll make the Bible real to all of us as we go through it. And I just thank you for a chance to meet here and the way this church has been so supportive of our apologetics. And just bless people as they go about the rest of this week and ask in your son's name. Amen.
Amen.